You know those moments, right, when you're in a really tricky situation and you're just trying to figure out what the right thing to do is? We've all been there. And usually, we fall back on gut feelings, or maybe some simple rules we picked up as kids. But what if I told you there's a more powerful way to think through right and wrong? That's what we're diving into today. Moral theories. These are the frameworks that philosophers have been building for centuries to help us tackle the biggest, most complex ethical questions you can imagine.
So think about the simple rules we all try to live by. Never lie, always keep your promises, don't steal. And yeah, most of the time they work just fine. But what happens when they crash into each other? What if you have to lie to save someone's life, or break a promise to stop something terrible from happening? All of a sudden, those simple black and white rules get really gray. Are they really enough to get us through the genuine messiness of life?
And this is where we get to a really crucial distinction. See, most of us run on what you'd call a moral code. It's basically a set of rules. Think of something like the Ten Commandments. It tells you what to do. But a moral theory, that's something different entirely. It's an explanation. It's trying to get to the very heart of why something is right or wrong in the first place. I love this analogy. It's the difference between just having a list of instructions for a machine versus actually understanding the engineering principles that make it work. So, here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll look at exactly why those simple moral codes sometimes fail us. Then, we'll nail down what a moral theory actually is. After that, we'll check out the two main types of theories, do a quick tour of the major players, and then, and this is the best part, we'll get into how you can judge a theory for yourself.
All right, let's jump right in. Section 1, Why Moral Codes Fail. This is all about the problem that moral theories are trying to solve.
Yeah, this quote really nails it. Think of it this way. A moral code gives you the rules of the road, right? Stop at red lights, don't speed. But a moral theory, that's like having the whole map and knowing how to navigate. Seeing beyond the rules is about what you do when you hit a roadblock that's not in the driver's manual, or when two rules are telling you to turn left and right at the same time.
I mean, take a rule like do not kill. Seems pretty absolute, right? But what about self-defense? What about a soldier in wartime? What about all those incredibly complex end-of-life decisions that doctors and families have to make? Simple rules just don't have the nuance for the real world's gray areas. They don't have an appendix for exceptions, and frankly, that's where we need the most help.
Okay, so if simple codes don't always cut it, what's the alternative? Well, that brings us perfectly to Section 2. What is a moral theory anyway?
So here's the textbook definition. But look at that keyword again. Explanation. A theory isn't just a command. It's on a mission. It's trying to find that one underlying thing, that right-making characteristic that all good actions have in common. It's like it's searching for the secret ingredient of morality itself.
Okay, so you're probably wondering, where do these theories even come from? Do philosophers just make them up? Nope, not at all. They're built and tested against something really important, our considered moral judgments. Now that sounds academic, but it's simple. Think about a belief you hold with near total certainty, like torturing babies for fun is wrong. That's a considered moral judgment. It's one of our core moral intuitions, one we've arrived at after stripping away bias and self-interest as much as we can.
And honestly, the best way to get this is to think about science. A scientific theory, like the theory of gravity, has to explain the data, right? It has to explain why apples fall down and not up. Well, a moral theory works the same way. It has to explain its data, our considered moral judgments. A good theory needs to explain why we almost universally agree that compassion is a good thing and cruelty is a bad thing. And this is so important because it turns ethics from just a shouting match of opinions into a rational, thoughtful process.
Okay, so once we're on board with theories being these explanatory frameworks, it turns out they really come in two main flavors. Which brings us to Section 3, the two types of theories.
This is pretty much the biggest fork in the road in all of ethics. On one side, you've got your consequentialist theories. For them, it's all about the consequences, the outcome. The right action is whatever produces the best possible result for the most people. For them, the ends can justify the means. But on the other side, you have the non-consequentialists, and they say, whoa, hold on, the results aren't everything. They believe the nature of the act itself matters. Some things, like lying or breaking a core promise, are just plain wrong, no matter how good the outcome might be. For them, the ends absolutely do not justify the means.
All right, let's make this a little less abstract. Time for a quick tour of some of the biggest names in the game. Welcome to Section 4.
First up, the big one, utilitarianism. This is your classic consequentialist theory. The core idea is actually pretty simple, but it's super powerful. The morally right thing to do is whatever creates the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people. It's all about adding up the good, subtracting the bad, and picking the option that maximizes overall happiness. But here's the classic challenge, right? What if sacrificing one person's happiness, or even their life, would create the greatest good for everybody else? It's a tough question, and it's why critics worry it could lead to a tyranny of the majority.
And in the other corner, you've got Immanuel Kant's theory, a heavyweight of non-consequentialism. Kant said morality has nothing to do with calculating happiness. It's all about duty and universal rules. His big idea was the categorical imperative, which sounds complicated, but is really just a fancy way of asking, what if everybody did this? If you can't imagine a world where everyone follows the same rule you're about to use without it all falling apart, then that action is morally wrong. The knock against Kant, though, is that his rules can be super rigid. The classic example is, you'd have to tell the truth to a murderer who asks if your friend is hiding in your house, because never lie has to be a universal rule, no matter what.
Another big non-consequentialist idea is natural law theory. The basic idea here is that everything in nature has a purpose, and that includes us humans. So morally right actions are the ones that are in line with our natural human purposes. Things like preserving our own life, seeking out knowledge, and forming communities. Morality, from this point of view, is really all about fulfilling our potential as the kind of beings we were designed to be.
Okay, wow. Utilitarianism, Kant, natural law, that's a lot. How in the world are you supposed to choose between them? It can definitely feel overwhelming. But here's the thing, it's not just about picking the one that sounds best to you. There's a method to it. And that brings us to our final, and I think most useful section, how to judge a theory.
Let's bring back that science analogy one last time, because it works perfectly here. Scientists don't just pick a theory because they have a good feeling about it, right? They have criteria, like, does it explain the data? Is it consistent? Well, it's the same in moral philosophy. We can actually evaluate these theories in a rational way. And here is the toolkit you can use. It's basically a three-part test for any moral theory. First, is it consistent with our considered judgments? Does it line up with those core moral beliefs we're most certain about? Any theory that ends up saying torturing babies for fun is okay is going to fail this test hard. Second, is it consistent with our moral experience? Does it explain things like why we feel guilt, why we have moral disagreements, or why we sometimes change our minds? And third, is it actually useful? When you're stuck in a real moral mess, does the theory give you any actual practical guidance to find your way out? And these aren't just some random questions I came up with. They have a name, the moral criteria of adequacy. It's a systematic way to put any theory through its paces. You can use it to see where a theory is strong and where it's weak. And this is what's so cool. It changes philosophy from just learning about old ideas into an active, critical thinking skill that you can actually use.
So there you have it. We've gone from simple, everyday rules to these big, complex theories. And finally, to a practical toolkit for taking them apart and seeing how they work. Because the real power here isn't about memorizing names like Kant or utilitarianism. It's about using these powerful ideas to become a more thoughtful, more consistent, and more deliberate person when you're facing those tough choices. Which leaves me with one last question to chew on. Now that you have the tools, how would you start building your own moral framework?